Imagine a world where psychology didn't see you as a bundle of instincts, or as a machine responding to rewards and punishments. Imagine a world where psychology dared to ask, what does it mean to be human? In the mid-20th century, two men, Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow, sparked what would be called the Humanistic Revolution. They challenged the old paradigms of Freud's psychoanalysis and Skinner's behaviorism, insisting that human beings are more than patients, more than rats in a lab. We are creative, striving, meaning-seeking creatures. But here's the question. Can psychology truly capture the essence of the human spirit? Today, we journey into the rise of humanistic psychology, an approach that promised hope, dignity, and the possibility of growth. We'll uncover how Rogers and Maslow reshaped therapy, education, and even corporate culture. We'll see the triumphs, the criticisms, and the legacy that still lives on in modern psychology. This is the story of the humanistic revolution in psychology. But to understand why it was revolutionary, we need to step back. Because before Rogers and Maslow, psychology looked very different. To understand the humanistic revolution, we must first step into the world that came before it. The early to mid-20th century was dominated by two psychological giants, Sigmund Freud and B.F. Skinner. Their ideas shaped not only how psychologists saw the mind, but also how society understood human behavior. But here's the catch. Both schools of thought, in their own way, left out something crucial: the human spirit. Freud and the depths of the unconscious. Freud's psychoanalysis painted a picture of human beings as creatures ruled by hidden drives, conflicts, and repressed desires. Beneath the surface of our conscious minds, Freud argued, lay a storm of unconscious wishes, many sexual, many aggressive, struggling for expression. The id demanded raw pleasure. The superego enforced society's rules, and the ego desperately tried to balance the two. It was a dark, often pessimistic view of humanity. According to Freud, we were not free agents. We were prisoners of our past, shaped by childhood traumas, doomed to repeat unconscious patterns unless years of psychoanalysis could untangle them. Freud once wrote, "The ego is not master in its own house." That single line captures his worldview. Our conscious selves are not truly in control. Reflective pause. Important? Yes. Transformative? Absolutely. But where was the hope? Where was the vision of human potential? Behaviorism, humans as machines. While Freud looked inward, another movement turned outward. Behaviorism, championed by John Watson and later B.F. Skinner, rejected the very idea of the mind as a subject of study. Behaviorists said, forget the unconscious, forget inner experience. Psychology should only study observable behavior. In Watson's famous words, give me a dozen healthy infants, and I'll guarantee to take anyone at random and train him to become any type of specialist I might select. Doctor, lawyer, artist, merchant chief, and yes, even beggarman and thief. To Watson and Skinner, humans were blank slates. We learned everything through conditioning, rewards, punishments, reinforcements. Skinner's pigeons and rats became symbols of this approach. If animals could be taught to press levers, humans too could be engineered, shaped, and controlled. But again, something was missing. Where was creativity, choice, love, purpose? The problem with both by the 1940s and 1950s, psychology was caught between two extremes. Freud's pessimism, humans trapped by unconscious forces. Skinner's reductionism, humans reduced to stimulus and response. Neither gave room for free will. Neither honored the richness of human experience. And yet, outside the lab and the clinic, the world was changing fast. After World War II, societies were rebuilding, cultures were questioning old systems, and people were searching for meaning in a rapidly modernizing world. It was in this cultural climate that a new voice emerged in psychology. A voice that said, we are not just sick patients or conditioned animals. We are human beings, and that means we can grow, we can create, we can become. That voice belonged to Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow. Together, they would spark the humanistic revolution. By the 1950s, psychology was at a crossroads. Freud's psychoanalysis had dominated the first half of the century, and Skinner's behaviorism was shaping laboratories, universities, and even classrooms. But not everyone was satisfied. Many, psychologists and many ordinary people, felt that something essential was missing. This was the era of post-war optimism. Soldiers had returned home. Societies were rebuilding. The American dream promised opportunity, freedom, and self-expression. At the same time, the horrors of World War II had left people asking, what does it mean to live a good life? How do we prevent the dehumanization that led to atrocities? In the arts, literature, and philosophy, voices of human dignity and authenticity grew louder. Thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Martin Buber emphasized freedom, choice, and genuine relationships. In education, reformers demanded schools that nurtured creativity rather than obedience. Psychology, meanwhile, seemed stuck in reductionist models. It was here that a third force in psychology began to emerge. The third force in psychology, humanistic psychology, was called the third force for a reason. The first force was Freud's psychoanalysis. The second force was behaviorism. The third force was humanism. Unlike Freud, the humanists didn't see people as victims of unconscious drives. Unlike Skinner, they didn't see people as machines. Instead, they saw humans as meaning-seeking, self-directed beings capable of growth, love, creativity, and choice. Pause, rhetorical question. But who would lead this movement? Who would give it a voice? Two figures stood at the center: Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow. The seeds of a revolution in 1961, the Association for Humanistic Psychology was founded. It gathered psychologists who felt restricted by mainstream approaches. At their conferences, ideas flowed freely about creativity, authenticity, spiritual experience, and personal growth. The 1960s counterculture movement also played a role. The rise of civil rights activism, the women's movement, and protests against war all reflected a yearning for freedom and authenticity. People were rejecting rigid systems, whether political or psychological. Humanistic psychology provided a scientific and therapeutic language for that yearning. The key principles of humanistic psychology, by the late 1950s and early 1960s, humanistic psychology was taking shape around a few central ideas. Humans are inherently good. Unlike Freud's dark view, humanists believed people are naturally oriented toward growth, not destruction. Free will and choice matter. Unlike behaviorists, they insisted humans are not just products of conditioning. The whole person must be studied, not just symptoms, not just observable behavior, but subjective experience, emotions, relationships, and meaning. Self-actualization is the goal. The belief that every person has an innate potential to become the best version of themselves. Therapy should be client-centered, focused not on the therapist's interpretation, but on empowering the individual. These principles were not abstract. They were embodied in the writings, lectures, and therapeutic practices of Rogers and Maslow. Psychology meets culture. It's important to remember, this revolution wasn't just about academic psychology, it was also about culture. The 1960s were a time of self-exploration, from meditation and yoga to experiments with altered states of consciousness. Books like Maslow's Toward a Psychology of Being and Rogers's On Becoming a Person became bestsellers, not only in classrooms, but also on bookshelves of ordinary readers searching for meaning. Universities began offering courses in creativity and human potential. Therapy became more conversational, less hierarchical. And the idea of personal growth spread beyond therapy rooms into education, business, and even politics. Something new was happening. Psychology was no longer only about treating mental illness. It was about promoting well-being, and at the center of this wave stood Carl Rogers, the gentle therapist who transformed the art of listening and Abraham Maslow, the visionary thinker who mapped out the ladder of human needs. Together, they lit a fire that would change psychology forever. At the heart of the humanistic revolution was a quiet, gentle man who believed in the power of listening. His name was Carl Rogers, and he changed therapy forever. Rogers was not the kind of psychologist who wanted to diagnose, interpret, or control his patients. He didn't sit behind a couch like Freud, nor did he run conditioning experiments like Skinner. Instead, he sat across from people, face to face, and simply listened. But his listening was not passive. It was active, empathetic, deeply human. For Rogers, therapy was not about fixing broken people. It was about creating the right conditions for growth. Because, he believed, every person has within them a powerful tendency, the drive to become their fullest, most authentic self. Early life and influences. Carl Rogers was born in 1902 in Oak Park, Illinois. Raised in a strict religious household, he was taught discipline, morality, and hard work. But beneath that rigidity, Rogers developed a quiet sensitivity. He studied agriculture, then theology, before turning to psychology. His background in religion gave him a sense of moral seriousness, but his shift to psychology reflected a deeper question. How do people truly change? In graduate school at Columbia University, Rogers began working with troubled children. Unlike many of his professors, who emphasized strict authority, Rogers noticed something simple. When he approached children with warmth and respect, they opened up. This was the seed of his life's work, the belief that acceptance heals. Person-centered therapy. By the 1940s, Rogers had developed his groundbreaking approach, client-centered therapy, later renamed person-centered therapy. This was radical for its time. In the psychoanalytic tradition, the therapist was the expert, interpreting the patient's unconscious. In behaviorism, the therapist was a trainer, shaping behavior. Rogers rejected both. He argued that the client is the true expert on their own life. The therapist's role is not to interpret or control, but to create an atmosphere of trust, acceptance, and empathy. He once said, "It is astonishing how elements which seem insoluble become soluble when someone listens. How confusions which seem irremediable turn into relatively clear flowing streams when one is heard." The three core conditions. Rogers outlined three core conditions necessary for therapeutic growth. These became famous in psychology. Unconditional positive regard. The therapist accepts the client fully, without judgment, without conditions. Not, "I accept you if you succeed," but, "I accept you because you are human." This radical acceptance allows clients to drop defenses and explore their true selves. Empathy. More than sympathy, empathy is the ability to enter into the client's world and see as they see. Rogers was a master at reflecting clients' feelings back to them, showing he truly understood. Congruence. Authenticity. The therapist must be genuine, not hiding behind professional masks. If the therapist feels confused, they can admit it. If they feel moved, they can show it. This authenticity models honesty for the client. Together, these conditions create a safe psychological climate where growth becomes possible. Famous case study, Gloria. Perhaps the most famous demonstration of Rogers' method was the 1965 film 3 Approaches to Psychotherapy, featuring a woman named Gloria. In the film, Gloria speaks with 3 therapists: Carl Rogers, Humanistic; Fritz Perls, Gestalt; and Albert Ellis, Rational Emotive. When Gloria sits down with Rogers, she is nervous and conflicted about her personal life, especially how to talk with her daughter about relationships. Rogers doesn't lecture, he doesn't analyze, he listens, deeply, attentively. He reflects back her feelings, helping her hear her own inner voice more clearly. Viewers were struck by Rogers' warmth and empathy. Many said they felt healed simply by watching the session. This film spread Rogers' approach worldwide, cementing him as the father of person-centered therapy. Growth, not illness, one of Rogers' most radical ideas, was that therapy should not focus solely on treating pathology. Instead of asking, "What's wrong with this person?" Rogers asked, "What potential lies within this person?" This reframed therapy as a journey of personal growth. A client wasn't a patient with a disease. They were a person with a story, capable of growth when given the right environment. This approach resonated with the cultural mood of the 1960s, when people were questioning authority and searching for authenticity. Rogers' message was empowering. You already have the resources you need inside you. Rogers beyond the therapy room. Rogers' influence stretched far beyond psychotherapy. Education. He believed classrooms should be student-centered, not teacher-dominated. Learning, he argued, thrives when students feel respected and free. Conflict resolution. Later in life, Rogers facilitated peace talks in Northern Ireland and South Africa, using his methods of deep listening and empathy to bring hostile groups together. Human potential movement. His ideas fueled the 1960s and 70s wave of workshops, encounter groups, and personal growth seminars. Wherever there was a need for empathy and understanding, Rogers' voice carried. In Rogers' vision, to be human is to have within us a tendency toward growth, a seed always reaching for the light. But to flourish, that seed needs soil, water, and sunlight. In other words, it needs acceptance, empathy, and authenticity. Rogers gave psychology a new lens, not just illness, but potential, not just survival, but growth, not just analysis, but listening. And while Rogers was cultivating the art of empathy, another figure was sketching a bold map of human motivation, a ladder of needs that would become iconic. His name was Abraham Maslow. While Carl Rogers was revolutionizing therapy through empathy and listening, another thinker was mapping the motives that drive human behavior. His name was Abraham Maslow, and his vision would become one of the most recognizable frameworks in psychology, the hierarchy of needs. Maslow asked a fundamental question: what makes people strive, create, and become their best selves? Unlike Freud, who focused on conflict and deficiency, or Skinner, who studied behavior in reaction to stimuli, Maslow wanted to understand what drives human growth. The result was a radical shift in perspective, an optimistic view of human nature that resonated deeply with the post-war generation seeking meaning and fulfillment. Early life and influences. Maslow was born in 1908 in Brooklyn, New York, to immigrant parents. Growing up, he experienced both hardship and cultural richness, and he became fascinated by human potential from a young age. He initially studied law, then psychology, drawn by questions of human motivation and fulfillment. Early in his career, he noticed that psychology tended to study the sick or abnormal rather than the healthy or thriving. This observation led him to a radical idea. If psychology wanted to understand humanity, it should study exemplars of human excellence. People like Albert Einstein, Eleanor Roosevelt, and Frederick Douglass, individuals who had achieved extraordinary personal growth and self-expression. The Hierarchy of Needs. In 1943, Maslow published A Theory of Human Motivation, introducing the hierarchy of needs, often visualized as a pyramid: physiological needs, food, water, shelter, sleep. Without these, survival is impossible. Safety needs: security, stability, freedom from fear. Once basic survival is assured, people seek safety. Love and belongingness needs: friendship, intimacy, family, community. Humans are social creatures who crave connection. Esteem needs: respect, recognition, competence, achievement. People want to feel valued by themselves and others. Self-actualization, the pinnacle of human motivation, fulfilling one's potential, creativity, moral development, and authenticity. Maslow. believed that lower needs must generally be met before higher needs can motivate behavior. But he also emphasized that these needs are dynamic. Life is rarely a straight climb, and people often move back and forth between levels. Self-actualization and peak experiences. Maslow didn't just stop at self-actualization. He introduced the concept of peak experiences, moments of profound joy, transcendence, and clarity. Peak experiences are those moments when individuals feel fully alive, fully authentic, and deeply connected to the world. Maslow described them as times when people feel more whole, integrated, aware, and alive than usual. For Maslow, these experiences were evidence that humans are not just driven by deficiency or survival, but by growth, creativity, and meaning. Real life. Examples. Maslow studied extraordinary individuals to illustrate self-actualization. Albert Einstein, driven not just by fame or money, but by curiosity and understanding. Eleanor Roosevelt, dedicated to humanitarian work and personal integrity. Thomas Jefferson, pursued ideals of freedom, creativity, and societal progress. Maslow argued that self-actualized people share traits such as autonomy and independence, creativity and problem-solving, deep relationships and empathy, a sense of purpose beyond themselves. He believed that anyone could move toward self-actualization if they had supportive conditions. Echoing Carl Rogers' focus on the environment. For growth, Maslow's broader impact. Maslow's ideas didn't stay confined to psychology. They influenced education, student-centered learning, creativity, and holistic development, business and management, employee motivation, leadership and workplace fulfillment, therapy, human potential workshops, self-help movements, and coaching. Culture. The 1960s and 70s human potential movement, which emphasized self-exploration and personal growth. Maslow's optimism was a counterbalance to the more deterministic views of Freud and Skinner. He reminded the world that humans are not just victims of drives or external conditioning. They are potential in motion. Reflective tone. Together, Rogers and Maslow reshaped the way we think about psychology. Rogers taught us to listen deeply and foster growth, while Maslow gave us a map of human motivation. Their ideas intersected in profound ways. Both emphasized the inherent potential of the human being, the importance of environment, and the necessity of authenticity and personal growth. But the revolution wasn't only theoretical, it had real-world consequences, transforming therapy, education, and even organizations across the globe.